Hey everyone, Dr. David Elfrey today talking about long COVID and brain fog. This is a long reel, but it's one of the most interesting ones I've ever done. We know that patients with long COVID often have problems with mentation, with thinking, with critical thinking, with critical analysis, with focusing, with memory. Collectively, we call that brain fog. Nobody knows why some patients get it, and nobody knows what to do about it. Well, a week ago, in this very prestigious journal, Cell, some researchers at Penn State presented their findings and their theory that this brain fog is due to inflammation in the GI tract. What? Where'd that come from? Well, here's what they did. Now, I've got a nice sheet like this. I'm a dinosaur. I get to do it this way. So we know that patients with long COVID, if you look at their stool, many of them will have viral particles in it, particles from the COVID virus. That must mean that they've got a little reservoir for the virus up in the GI tract. Now we would know that because the mucosa, the lining of the GI tract, turns over every 5 days. So if over time you get this continual shedding, there must be some viral activity there. So they said, let's take some mice and let's give them an abdominal infection, a GI infection of a virus. And they took a virus that was very similar to COVID. They couldn't culture the COVID virus, so they put a virus in that shares a lot of similarities to COVID. And they said, well, we can expect that the same thing would happen in their GI system as happens in a human's. And that is the immunoresponse, which would be T cells rushing to that area and releasing something called interferon. Now, interferon is among many things that T cells release, but this is one that's really important. And it's in a group of proteins called cytokines. And cytokines are the things that fight infection. They're the things that give us a fever when we fight infection, that cause that redness around an area of infection. So they result in fighting this infection with inflammation. And they said, if we get that inflammation, that should impair the absorption of tryptophan from the gut. Now, tryptophan turns out to be an amino acid. We have 20 amino acids in our body, and they're the building blocks of all of our proteins. Well, tryptophan is a really important one because it's the precursor to serotonin. And serotonin is a really important neurotransmitter. Let's see, neurotransmitter, nerve. So it helps send signals along nerves. And in particular, it sends signals along the vagus nerve from the abdomen to the brain. And one particular area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is really important in forming memories. So, to summarize, they said, let's take some mice, let's give them a viral infection in their abdomen, see if we can get an immune response and some inflammation, which would decrease the amount of tryptophan that's absorbed, which should decrease the amount of serotonin that's produced, which should decrease or impair the signal from the abdomen to the brainstem. Pretty wild stuff. So what did they find? Well, they found, first of all, when they did serotonin levels on these mice, they were decreased. And then they tried to teach them some things, like run through a maze and eat a cracker. And they found out that the mice weren't very good at that. They weren't able to really form the memories to tell them how to repeat it. So then they took these infected mice and they put them into two groups. In one group, they said, let's give them some extra tryptophan. Thinking the tryptophan would be turned into some serotonin and increase those serotonin levels. In another group, they said, let's give them some Prozac. Now, you've all heard about Prozac. It's an antidepressant. And it's in the class of drugs called SSRIs. SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So it inhibits the uptake of serotonin from the bloodstream. So you get more serotonin in your bloodstream. In these two groups, what did they find? Well, increased levels of serotonin in their bloodstream, and now they could make the memories. that ability was restored. Isn't that wild? So, how does this apply to humans? We know that patients with long COVID, many of them have low serotonin levels. I don't think it's ever been studied in humans to say, you've got a group of patients with brain fog, let's all give you an SSRI drug. But you better believe it's going to be done soon. Secondly, maybe tryptophan supplements would be good for these patients. Maybe fighting a residual infection would be good. Maybe giving them 25 days of Paxlovid to try to knock out any residual infection. And in fact, that is currently being studied by the NIH as part of their $1.5 billion Recover project in looking at long COVID. I wanted to present this because brain fog with long COVID is such a huge problem. And for the first time in a long time, maybe there's a little glint of hope for these patients. Now, if you don't know who I am, I'm a retired cardiac anesthesiologist, and every few days I post a reel like this. Usually they're pretty short, of general interest. When I did retire, I wrote a book called Saving Grace: What Patients Teach Their Doctors About Life, Death, and the Balance in Between. It's an insider's view of the ORs. It's never been written before because no anesthesiologist has ever written and divulged the secrets of what really goes on in the operating room. You'll laugh, you'll cry. I mean, some pretty wild stories in there. Trust me, it'll really change your life if you get it. The average Amazon review is 4.8. Nobody gets reviews that high for a book. If you want to get an excerpt, to hear an audible excerpt or read an excerpt, get on the website savinggracebook.com. If you found this valuable and interesting, check out the book and pass this video on to someone else. I'll be posting something else in another day or two. Thanks for watching.